The moment she stops explaining herself, the room changes. No raised voice, no dramatic exit, just a quiet shift where her presence suddenly carries more weight than her words ever did. Silence, when it arises from self-integration, is not the absence of voice but the completion of an inner dialogue. It appears when the divided parts of the psyche have finally met one another and no longer need an external witness to validate their existence. A woman who reaches this silence is not retreating from the world. She is no longer fragmented within herself. Earlier in life, explanation serves a psychological purpose. It is an attempt to reconcile inner truth with outer acceptance. Each explanation is a bridge thrown outward, hoping the world will confirm what the inner world has not yet fully embraced. But once integration occurs, that bridge is no longer necessary. Self-integration means that the conscious self has stopped fighting the unconscious. Desires once hidden, emotions once suppressed, instincts once judged as unacceptable are no longer enemies. They have been acknowledged, understood, and absorbed into the personality. When this happens, speech changes its function. Words are no longer used to defend identity, because identity no longer feels under threat. Silence emerges naturally, not as strategy, but as psychological economy. There is nothing left to justify, because nothing inside is being denied. Before this integration, a woman often explains herself compulsively. She explains her feelings so they will seem reasonable, her boundaries so they will seem fair, her ambitions so they will not appear threatening. This impulse does not come from weakness but from inner division. One part of her knows the truth of what she feels. Another part fears rejection if that truth stands alone. Explanation is the negotiation between these parts. Silence arrives when negotiation ends. In this state, silence becomes dense with meaning. It carries conviction because it is rooted in wholeness. Others sense this immediately, often without understanding why. There is no nervous energy leaking through excessive words. No subtle pleading hidden inside clarification. Her presence feels settled. This is why silence can feel intimidating. It offers no handles for manipulation. It does not invite correction or debate. It stands complete. Psychologically, this silence signals individuation. The personality is no longer organized around adaptation alone, but around inner truth. When a woman stops explaining herself, she is no longer orienting her psyche toward external approval. She is oriented inward, toward coherence. This inward alignment creates an outward authority not derived from dominance, but from congruence. What she thinks, feels, and does now exist on the same axis. This silence also marks the withdrawal of projection. Earlier, she may have unconsciously handed others the power to define her worth. Their reactions mattered because parts of her identity lived inside their opinions. When integration occurs, those projections are reclaimed. The energy once spent monitoring reactions is now contained within the self. Silence replaces explanation because there is no longer an unconscious need to manage how others see her. Men often feel unsettled by this silence because it disrupts familiar psychological roles. When a woman explains herself, she unconsciously positions the other as judge, interpreter, or authority. Silence removes that role. The man is no longer placed above her as evaluator, nor beneath her as someone to be persuaded. He is simply faced with her as she is. This equality can feel like loss of control to those accustomed to relational imbalance. Silence as self-integration is not emotional withdrawal. Emotion is still present, but it is no longer spilling outward in search of containment. The woman has become the container for her own emotional life. She feels deeply, but she does not leak. This creates a sense of gravity. Others lean in, not because she is loud, but because she is centered. Importantly, this silence does not mean she never speaks. When she does speak, words arrive whole. They are not rehearsed for acceptance. They are not padded to avoid discomfort. They emerge from an inner alignment that has already resolved doubt. This is why fewer words carry more impact. Each sentence is backed by an integrated psyche, not by anxiety. There is also a shadow dimension to this silence. It includes the acceptance of anger, desire, ambition, and refusal. Earlier, these forces may have been softened through explanation to remain socially acceptable. Integration means they no longer need disguise. Silence holds them intact. This can be confronting to others, because they sense what is present, even when it is unspoken. Silence as self-integration ultimately changes relational dynamics without effort. It is not a tactic learned from books or strategies. It is a psychological consequence of becoming whole. When inner conflict resolves, outer noise diminishes. The woman does not withhold explanation to gain power. Power emerges because she no longer needs to explain. Her silence is simply the sound of a psyche that has come home to itself. The end of seeking validation is not an act of rebellion against others. It is a psychological return to oneself. It begins quietly, often after years of adapting, pleasing, and adjusting the self to fit into external expectation. Validation is first learned as survival. Approval becomes a mirror through which identity is formed. A woman learns who she is by watching how she is received. This is not pathology, it is development. But there comes a moment when this external mirror no longer reflects truth, only distortion. And at that moment, the psyche grows restless. Seeking validation is the psyche's MPT to stabilize a fragile sense of self. When inner authority is undeveloped, the ego borrows certainty from others, presudes doubt, agreement reduces anxiety, and acceptance temporarily quiets the fear of being unseen or unworthy. Yet this borrowed certainty never lasts. It must be renewed again and again, which is why validation becomes addictive. The more one depends on it, the more empty one feels without it. The end of seeking validation occurs when the ego matures enough to tolerate disapproval without disintegration. This is not indifference but resilience. The woman who reaches this stage no longer collapses inward when misunderstood. She understands that misunderstanding does not equal erasure. Her identity no longer dissolves in the absence of applause. This marks a profound psychological shift. Worth is no longer negotiated externally. It is experienced internally. This shift often arrives through disappointment. She explains herself, gives context, offers emotional labor, and still feels unseen. Again and again, she meets the limit of explanation. At some point, the psyche recognizes a painful truth. No amount of clarity can force recognition where consciousness is lacking. This realization is not cynical. It is sobering. It redirects energy back to its rightful place. When validation is no longer sought, projection collapses. Earlier, the woman may have unconsciously handed her power to others by allowing their reactions to define her emotional state. Approval elevated her. Rejection diminished her. These reactions carried exaggerated weight because parts of her self-image lived inside them. Ending validation seeking means reclaiming those projections. What once belonged to others' opinions returns to the self. This return is not comfortable. Without external validation, old doubts surface. The psyche is forced to confront its own emptiness, its unresolved insecurities, its unintegrated shadow. Many retreat at this stage, returning to familiar patterns of explanation and approval seeking. But those who stay experience something transformative. They begin to generate their own sense of rightness, not perfection, but coherence. As this inner coherence grows, behavior changes. Decisions are made with less consultation. Boundaries are set without lengthy justification. Emotional reactions become steadier. There is less urgency to be liked, understood, or chosen. This does not produce isolation, it produces selectivity. Relationships are no longer used to stabilize identity, they become places of encounter rather than rescue. Men often feel this change immediately, even if they cannot articulate it. A woman who no longer seeks validation does not lean psychologically. She does not adjust herself to maintain approval. This removes a familiar dynamic. There is no silent request in her tone. No hidden plea beneath her words. She is present, but not dependent. This presence feels heavier, more real, the end of validation seeking. G also alters how conflict is experienced. Disagreement no longer threatens the self. It becomes information, not judgment. She can listen without surrendering and speak without defending. This is why her silence grows. Not because she has nothing to say, but because she no longer needs to say everything to feel safe. This stage marks a crucial step in individuation. The ego is no longer ruled by collective expectation. It has established a dialogue with the deeper self. Approval from others becomes secondary to alignment with inner truth. When forced to choose between being accepted and being authentic, she no longer hesitates. This choice, once terrifying, now feels inevitable. Importantly, the end of seeking validation does not eliminate the desire for connection. It purifies it. She still values intimacy, recognition, and love, but she no longer trades herself for them. What once felt like rejection now feels like information about compatibility. This clarity protects her energy and deepens her relationships. This inner shift cannot be faked. It is felt somatically, psychologically, and relationally. Her posture changes. Her voice slows, her words carry less explanation and more finality. She does not announce her independence from validation, she embodies it. And because this independence is rooted in psychological maturity rather than defiance, it carries a quiet authority. The end of seeking validation is not an ending at all, but a return to the self-a. The primary source of meaning, return to an inner compass that does not spin wildly in response to external winds. From this place, a woman no longer asks the world who she is. She lives as if she already knows. Projection is one of the psyche's most subtle defenses. It allows a person to avoid confronting what feels intolerable within by locating it outside the self. What is disowned internally is perceived externally, often with great emotional charge. When a woman steps into psychological solidity, when she stops explaining herself, stops seeking validation, and stands in quiet self-trust, she becomes a powerful surface for projection. The discomfort others feel in her presence does not originate in her behavior alone, but in what her presence awakens within them. Discomfort arises when projection is interrupted. As long as a woman plays a familiar role, seeking approval, softening her truth, over-explaining, others can comfortably project authority, certainty, or superiority onto themselves. The relational field remains predictable, but when she withdraws these behaviors, the unconscious loses its hiding place. What was once placed onto her must now be carried by the observer. This sudden internalization creates unease. A woman who is integrated does not invite projection in the same way. She does not unconsciously offer herself as the container for others' unresolved material. She is not anxiously seeking approval, so she cannot easily carry someone else's sense of importance. She is not apologizing for her boundaries, so she cannot absorb someone else's guilt. This refusal is not active, it is structural. Her psyche is already occupied by herself. Men often experience this as a disturbance in the emotional atmosphere. They may describe her as intimidating, cold, or distant, though nothing in her behavior has changed except her inner alignment. These labels are projection. They reveal discomfort with her autonomy, rather than any objective flaw. What is actually being confronted is the absence of control, the loss of a familiar psychological leverage. Projection thrives in asymmetry. When one person doubts themselves, and the other feels certain, the uncertain one carries the anxiety. When the woman integrates, this asymmetry collapses. The man is no longer buffered by her self-doubt. He is forced to encounter his own. This can evoke irritation, attraction, defensiveness, or withdrawal. All are signs of projection struggling to re-establish itself. Discomfort intensifies when her silence is mistaken for judgment. In reality, she may not be thinking about him at all. But projection fills the silence with imagined evaluation. The unconscious assumes that if she is not explaining, she must be withholding, criticizing, or asserting superiority. This reveals an internalized fear of inadequacy. Her quiet presence becomes a mirror reflecting unexamined self-perceptions. Projection also operates through idealization. Some men may place exaggerated qualities into her mystery, power, emotion, depth, because she no longer dissipates herself through explanation. This too is a projection. They are encountering parts of their own psyche they have not yet integrated. Her presence activates these parts, and instead of recognizing them internally, they are attributed to her. The discomfort of projection is not evidence of wrongdoing. It is evidence of psychological contact. When the psyche meets something it cannot easily categorize or control, it reacts. A woman who is internally aligned disrupts unconscious patterns simply by existing. She does not need to confront, teach, or correct. Her presence already does the work. What makes this particularly unsettling is that projection removes moral clarity. The man may feel uncomfortable without knowing why. He may sense a loss of dominance without any overt challenge. The mind searches for explanations and often finds fault in her. She becomes too much or not warm enough. These are defenses against self-examination. Projection collapses most dramatically when she remains unaffected. If she reacted defensively, the projection would find confirmation, but her groundedness offers no such reinforcement. The discomfort lingers unresolved. This forces a choice: either deepen self-awareness or retreat into avoidance. Not everyone chooses growth. From a psychological perspective, this dynamic is inevitable when individuation occurs. The individuated person disrupts collective norms. They no longer unconsciously agree to carry others' unresolved material. This makes them appear powerful, even threatening, to those still dependent on projection for psychological balance. The woman does not need to correct the projections placed upon her. Doing so would pull her back into explanation and negotiation. Her task is not to manage others' discomfort, but to remain aligned with herself. Projection dissolves not through confrontation, but through lack of reinforcement. Over time, those capable of self-reflection will feel drawn to her. They sense that her presence invites growth. Those unwilling to face their inner contradictions will move away, often with rationalizations that preserve their self-image. Both responses are natural. Projection and discomfort reveal more about the observer than the observed. When a woman stands integrated, she becomes a psychological threshold. Those who cross it meet themselves. Those who cannot turn away. Her power lies not in causing discomfort, but in no longer absorbing it. Choosing boundaries over persuasion marks a decisive shift in the structure of the psyche. Persuasion belongs to a stage where the self is still negotiating its right to exist. It is an attempt to make one's inner truth acceptable to the outer world. Boundaries, by contrast, arise when the self no longer requires permission. They are not arguments, they are statements of psychological fact. When a woman moves from persuasion to boundaries, she is no longer asking to be understood before she is respected. She understands herself first. Persuasion is often rooted in fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being misjudged. It compels explanation, justification, and emotional labor. The woman tries to manage others' reactions so that her own inner equilibrium is not disturbed. In doing so, she unconsciously hands her authority outward. Her sense of rightness becomes dependent on agreement. Boundaries reclaim that authority. They mark the point where the ego aligns with the deeper self and no longer fragments under pressure. A boundary is not aggression. It is differentiation. It defines where one psyche ends and another begins. Without boundaries, the psyche becomes porous. Emotions, expectations, and judgments flow in and out unchecked. Persuasion thrives in this porous state because the self is constantly adjusting to external demands. Boundaries solidify the psychic skin. They protect inner coherence. When a woman stops persuading and starts setting boundaries, her communication changes. She speaks less, but with more weight. She no longer explains why something feels wrong. She states that it does. This can feel abrupt to those accustomed to negotiation. But what they are encountering is not coldness, it is clarity. Clarity feels harsh only to those who benefited from ambiguity. Men often experience the shift as a loss of influence. Persuasion invited participation. It allowed them to weigh in, interpret, or redirect her decisions. Boundaries remove that access. They do not ask for agreement. They simply indicate consequence. This creates discomfort because it confronts the illusion that connection requires negotiation of one's core. Psychologically, persuasion is linked to the persona, the adapted self that seeks harmony with the collective. Boundaries arise when the person is no longer allowed to override the authentic self. The woman has listened long enough to her own dissatisfaction. She recognizes that constant persuasion has not led to mutual understanding, only self-erasure. Boundaries become an act of self-respect rather than defense. This shift often provokes resistance. Others may accuse her of being rigid, selfish, or uncooperative. These reactions reveal an expectation that her inner world remain accessible for negotiation. When that access is withdrawn, it is experienced as loss. But boundaries are not punishment. They are acknowledgments of limits. Choosing boundaries over persuasion also alters the inner dialogue. The woman no longer debates herself endlessly. She stops questioning whether her needs are reasonable enough to be honored. This internal settling reduces anxiety. The psyche becomes quieter because it is no longer at war with itself. Outward silence often follows, not as withdrawal, but as alignment. Boundaries create a new relational dynamic. They invite respect rather than compliance. Those capable of meeting her as an equal will edge. Those invested in control will struggle. This is not her responsibility to manage. Her task is to remain congruent. Importantly, boundaries do not eliminate compassion. They refine it. She can care without collapsing. She can listen without surrendering. Persuasion required her to bend in order to connect. Boundaries allow connection without distortion. From a depth perspective, this is a movement toward individuation. The woman is no longer governed by unconscious fear of rejection. She has accepted the cost of being true to herself. That cost may include misunderstanding or loss. But the psyche recognizes that self-betrayal is more damaging than external disapproval. Boundaries over persuasion signal maturity. They reflect a psyche that has learned through experience that explanation does not create respect, and over-adaptation leads to resentment. Boundaries restore balance. They allow energy to flow inward rather than outward. When this shift occurs, others feel it immediately. There is less emotional noise, fewer justifications, and more finality. Her no stands on its own. Her yes is freely given. This steadiness feels powerful because it cannot be negotiated away. It does not need reinforcement. It simply exists as an expression of an integrated self. Embodied authority does not arise from position, force, or assertion. It emerges from the alignment of the inner world with outer action. When a woman embodies authority, she's no longer performing strength. He is living from it. This authority is not claimed through words nor defended through explanation. It is sensed immediately because it is rooted in psychological wholeness. Others feel it before they understand it because it operates beneath language at the level of presence. Authority that is embodied is the opposite of dominance. Dominance compensates for inner uncertainty. It seeks to control the environment to stabilize the self. Embodied authority has no such need. The woman who carries it does not scan the room for approval or threat. Her nervous system is settled. Her posture, pace, and voice reflect an inner order that no longer depends on external confirmation. This order has been earned through confrontation with the self. Such authority is the consequence of integration. The fragmented parts of the psyche, fear and desire, tenderness and firmness, intuition and reason are no longer at war. When these opposites are held together, energy stops leaking. The body becomes the vessel of this integration. Her movements are economical. Her reactions are measured. She does not rush to fill silence or correct misunderstandings. The body itself communicates containment. Men often feel this authority as gravity. Conversations slow around her. Attempts to test boundaries fall flat. Not because she resists, but because there is nothing to push against. She does not react defensively, nor does she seek to impress. This neutrality can feel unsettling to those accustomed to emotional feedback as a source of power. Her calm is not submission. It is sovereignty. Embodied authority also reshapes time. She is not in a hurry to be chosen, understood, or validated. This changes the relational tempo. Others feel the absence of urgency and often project intention onto it. They may assume calculation or detachment, when in truth she is simply no longer driven by lack. Her patience is not strategic. It is the natural outcome of inner sufficiency. This authority is inseparable from responsibility. She does not outsource her emotional state to others. If she is uncomfortable, she adjusts or leaves. If she is pleased, she enjoys without attachment. This self-responsibility creates trust. Even those who feel challenged by her presence recognize its integrity. There is no hidden agenda because there is no internal division demanding compensation. Embodied authority is also evident in how she relates to conflict. She does not escalate to be heard, nor does she shrink to preserve peace. She speaks when necessary and remains silent when words would distort truth. This discernment comes from deep listening, not to others first, but to herself. The body becomes an instrument of truth rather than a site of tension. Psychologically, this authority reflects a mature ego in relationship with the deeper self. The ego is no longer inflated or collapsed. It knows its limits and its capacities. This balance allows the woman to occupy space without apology. She does not announce her boundaries. They are felt. Her presence sets the tone before any agreement is reached. This kind of authority often provokes strong reactions. Some are drawn to it, sensing safety and depth. Others resist it, feeling exposed or diminished. These reactions are not caused by her behavior, but by the contrast she represents. She embodies what is possible when one stops abandoning oneself. For those still divided, this contrast can be painful. Embodied authority also redefines femininity. It is not performative softness, nor borrowed toughness. It includes receptivity without passivity and strength without hardness. The body carries both. This integration disrupts stereotypes and unsettles expectations. She does not fit easily into roles, because her authority comes from within rather than from conformity. Importantly, embodied authority cannot be imitated convincingly. Attempts to mimic it through posture or tone lack the underlying coherence. Others sense the difference immediately. True authority has weight because it is lived. It has been shaped by loss, insight, restraint, and self-confrontation. The body remembers these experiences and expresses them without conscious effort. When a woman embodies authority, he no longer needs to manage perceptions. She allows others to respond as they will. This freedom is the final marker of her power. She stands rooted in herself, not as a reaction to the world, but as a presence within it. What others feel in her presence is not dominance, but depth, and depth requires no explanation. When a woman stops explaining herself, she does not withdraw, she awakens. Her silence, her boundaries, her refusal to seek validation, and her embodied authority all radiate a power that cannot be negotiated or ignored. Men, and indeed the world around her, feel it because it reflects a completeness they cannot create for her. This power is not loud. It is not performative. It is the quiet, undeniable force of a psyche that has reconciled itself, embraced its truth, and no longer needs permission to exist. In that moment, she stands fully herself, and that is the most magnetic, transformative presence there is.